Welcome to Mischief Wargaming. I'm John and this is Brawl Arcane 28. Something a little different from the recent Blood Bowl binge, we dive into the city of Mirage and the deadly wizard duel sport of Brawl Arcane. This game is a duel between two or more wizards, throwing mystic projectiles at one another while summoning minions. The arena is played on a grid, a chessboard is ideal, and the aim of the game is to be the last wizard standing. All wizards have the same stat line and all have the same health, with the schools of magic being the main thing that differentiates them. Each wizard hails from a specific school of magic, ranging from the nature magic of the Green Witch, to the otherworldly void magic of the Astral Warlocks, to the foul art of necromancy. Each school of magic comes with a unique ability, discipline spell, and minion type. The first of our wizards is Ignatius, a noble scholar. Arrogant hoarders of knowledge that see themselves as wise sages. Ignatius's ability is Mystic Knowledge, allowing him to add a bonus to one roll once per game. His discipline spell is Teleport, which lets a minion ignore terrain, something that is usually impassable. Speaking of minions, the minions for Noble Scholars are living spells. Not particularly tough on their own, but they can use their Harmonic Blast to do extra damage. His opponent is Helen, the Metallurgist. These arcane blacksmiths forge raw magic into otherwise mundane objects, including automatons and armour. Her ability reflects this, being tough as nails, letting her roll twice and pick the better result when rolling for defence. Her discipline spell is Storm of Iron, a dangerous spell that can damage all enemies close to the initial target. Lastly, Metallurgy minions are automatons, a good all-round minion who come with crippling bash, which causes those hurt by it to move slower. The arena is set up. Each square with the mystic flames are impassable and block all line of sight. Ignatius will go first, but before play begins, the two wizards make a play to the crowd. Helen wins and gets some early crowd favour, a resource to be able to cause effects later in game. A turn in Brawl Arcane starts with spell selection. The active wizard rolls 2 dice and picks one of the available spells. If a double is rolled, they can pick any spell, and they can always pick Arcane Rocket. Ignatius rolls a double and chooses the Summon Minion spell. With the living spells benefiting from having nearby allies, the Scholar wants more minions out as quickly as possible. Spells which don't target opponents happen automatically with no dice roll needed. With the new living spell summoned, the minions move towards the Metallurgist. Helen's spell is Shield, which gives a minion +2 defense for a turn. Then her and her automaton move towards the living spells. The turns go by quickly in this game, as we're already back to the Scholar rolling for a new spell. This time he picks his discipline spell, Teleport. He teleports one of the living spells next to the automaton. The other living spell moves in and uses a Harmonic Blast on the automaton. As this is an offensive spell, both models roll a dice. The living spell will add their skill, while the automaton will add their defense. As the automaton is under the effect of Helen's shield, they get a bonus and are unaffected. The second living spell tries their luck against the minion, again resulting in the automaton being unharmed. The Metallurgist ends up choosing the Summon Minion spell. A second automaton is placed on the arena. The original one then uses Crippling Bash on the more recently summoned living spell. Ignatius's minion takes 3 damage and will have -1 movement for the next turn. The newly summoned automaton takes the fight to the Noble Scholar himself. Unfortunately, Ignatius rolls higher and he also has a higher defense. A new turn means new spells, and the Scholar chooses the Dominate spell. He tries to use the spell on the automaton who just attacked him. The spell easily succeeds, and for the rest of this turn, the automaton will act as a friendly minion. The dominated automaton turns their attention to their original master and uses Crippling Bash on the Metallurgist. I make a mistake here and forget to roll the second dice for Helen's Tough as Nails ability, and as a result she takes 3 damage and will move slower this turn. The 2 living spells focus on the other automaton, with the first one scoring a hit. Thanks to their harmonic nature, the attack does extra damage for every friendly model within 2 squares. The automaton takes 3 damage, but the second living spell fails to capitalise. Helen then rolls a double and chooses Arcane Rocket, a simple but long-range spell. Unfortunately, Ignatius was prepared and dispels the attack. The second automaton moves back and attacks the scholar. The result is tied, which causes a magical explosion. A further roll-off happens, the result of which will either reflect the spell back on the automaton or cause double damage to Ignatius. In this case the latter happens, meaning the wizard takes a massive 6 damage. Additionally, Helen will gain 1 crowd favour. The original automaton tries to use Crippling Bash on the living spell, but is unable to do any damage. Back to Ignatius, who chooses the Summon Minion spell. He immediately summons a 3rd living spell. 3 is the maximum number of minions a wizard can have at any one time. The original living spell uses Harmonic Blast on the first automaton. The spell works and banishes the Metallurgist minion. He then attacks the next automaton, this time causing 4 damage and immediately banishing it. More crowd favour for Ignatius. The newest living spell attacks Helen directly. However, her defence is too much, as her Tough as Nails ability lets her roll 2 dice and pick the highest. In return, Helen chooses Dominate, and uses it on the left-handed living spell. With the minion now under her control, it attacks Ignatius, but is unable to harm him. Ignatius begins his turn by spending crowd favour to plague the crowd for a random effect. Unfortunately, the crowd aren't on his side and begin booing, lowering the scholar's skill to 3 for the rest of the turn. He then picks the Empower spell. With lower skill, the Arcane Rocket spell is a tough choice, and he already has the maximum number of minions. Before he uses the spell, the right-hand living spell moves and uses Harmonic Blast on Helen. It does nothing, however. The scholar then uses his Empower spell on the new Pointing living spell. As the spell is cast without rolling any dice, the -1 skill has no effect. Empower gives the selected minion +2 skill for the rest of the turn. The Empowered living spell uses Harmonic Blast on Helen, the spell having no trouble getting past the wizard's impressive defence. With both other living spells and Ignatius in close range, the spell does a massive 5 damage to the Metallurgist. With over half her health gone, Helen calls on the crowd, but they are too busy fighting amongst themselves, and neither wizard can gain any more crowd favour until the beginning of Helen's next turn. She rolls for her spells, and between Summon Minion and Dominate, she chooses the latter. After successfully dominating the right-handed living spell, it turns on its allies and uses Harmonic Blast on the Pointing living spell. The attack easily succeeds, causing 3 damage to the minion. Ignatius rolls a 1 and a 6, which both equate to Summon Minion. so they choose Arcane Rocket. He moves, but he isn't in a position to attack Helen. Instead, the newest living spell uses Harmonic Blast on the enemy wizard, which goes through and causes 4 more damage. The original living spell moves next to Helen and attacks, but it isn't able to get past her defense. With only 3 health remaining, things are looking grim for Helen the Metallurgist. She chooses her discipline spell, Storm of Iron. With all the enemy minions hurt and close together, this spell is perfect. The initial target takes 2d3 damage, in this case a total of 4. That then banishes that living spell. But additionally, every enemy within range 2 also takes 2 damage, which is enough to banish the remaining living spells. For this, Helen gains +3 crowd favour and is now back in the fight. After disaster, Ignatius chooses Summon Minion and brings forth a brand new right-handed living spell. With the momentum swinging in her favour, Helen calls upon the crowd again, spending extra crowd favour to affect the roll. The result is a crystal shard fired at Ignatius, causing up to d6 damage. Unfortunately for her, it must have been a tiny crystal, as it only causes 1. After rolling for her spells, Helen picks Arcane Rocket. They get into position and fire a shard of metal at the new living spell, which takes d3 damage. In this case 2. Undeterred, Ignatius picks Summon Minion. And after moving up, summons a new left-handed living spell. Helen responds by summoning her own minion, a new automaton, who immediately gets to work and uses Crippling Bash on the weakened living spell. The attack is successful and the spell is banished, gaining more crowd favour for the Metallurgist. Ignatius rolls for his spells, but ultimately picks Arcane Rocket. He fires the projectile at the automaton, but is unable to damage the mechanical minion. The living spell moves in and tries to use Harmonic Blast on the automaton, but like Ignatius, is unable to damage it. Helen again uses crowd favour to try and gain an advantage. Her fans start chanting for her, letting her re-roll a single dice this turn. She rolls a Summon Minion spell and brings forth a new automaton. The older automaton uses Crippling Bash on the left-handed living spell, causing it to take 3 damage. The newly summoned automaton does the same, causing more damage and banishing that living spell, which gains Helen more crowd favour. Ignatius rolls for his spells, but like last turn, picks Arcane Rocket. Unfortunately for him, his attack also goes like last turn, where he's unable to damage Helen's minion. In return, Helen chooses her Storm of Iron spell, which is aimed squarely at Ignatius. The result of the attack would lead to a magical explosion, but Ignatius uses his Mystic Knowledge ability to gain +2 to his roll, narrowly avoiding potential disaster. The newer automaton tries to use crippling bash on Ignatius, but is unable to hit him. However, the other minion has better luck, which actually does cause a magical explosion. If Ignatius loses this roll-off, he would take 6 damage. Luck might be on his side though, as he wins, reflecting the 3 damage back onto the automaton. It's not all bad for Helen though, as despite taking damage, she gains crowd favour from the explosion. Ignatius rolls for Dominate, which he uses on the undamaged automaton. Under his control, the minion uses Crippling Bash against Helen, but her tough defense protects her. Helen then uses 2 more crowd favour, and the crowd go wild, and she gains exactly 2 crowd favour back. For her spell, Helen rolls a double, so chooses Empower, which she then uses on the automaton that Ignatius just dominated. The empowered minion attacks the Scholar. The boost from the Empower spell coming in handy, as Ignatius takes 3 damage. The other automaton joins in and uses Crippling Bash on the Wizard. Ignatius takes 3 more damage. With both wizards nearly defeated, it's all to play for as Ignatius desperately calls upon the crowd. A fire gremlin rushes into the arena and explodes next to a random player. I roll a dice, and a 1 it would be Ignatius, a 2 would be Helen, 3 and 4 are the various automatons, and I re-roll 5 and 6s. The older automaton is the gremlin's unfortunate target, and they take d6 damage, more than enough to banish them, and gains Ignatius some crowd favour before even rolling for his spell, which he chooses Dominate. However, the Dominate spell doesn't work, and that just immediately ends his turn. Helen also uses all of her crowd favour, but the crowd descend into fighting amongst themselves, preventing either player from gaining any crowd favour for a turn. Despite rolling for spells, Helen goes for an Arcane Rocket. Aimed squarely at the Noble Scholar's face. The attack hits the wizard, and Ignatius takes 3 damage, which is enough to knock him out. Helen, the Metallurgist, wins the duel. That game was really close. Initially, I thought it was going to be a one-sided affair after Ignatius banished the automatons and really started to utilise the harmonic blast of his living spells to do some serious damage to Helen. But then that Storm of Iron spell really levelled the playing field, destroying all 3 living spells in one go. Neither wizard would go down without a fight, and it really came down to that last turn, with both wizards an inch from defeat. So that was Brawl Arcane 28. Like I said at the beginning, there are a bunch of other schools of magic, which each have their own playstyles and minions. There are a lot more battle types with free-for-alls and facing against or with magical beasts. There's also the Brawl Arcane tournament itself, but with Blood Bowl currently running, I don't want to have too many tournaments and leagues going on at the same time. So check the game out. I've got a link to where you can download the rules for yourself in the description below. The game is miniatures agnostic, so you can use whatever fancy miniatures you like, and the terrain is as simple as a chessboard and something to block line of sight. The miniatures I used were all 3D printed, and the designs come from Victus Miniatures. I will also include a link to their page on my mini factory in the description as well. So until next time, thank you all very much for watching. Take care.